I'm sure that's true everywhere. Some of the work that the Henry Jackson Society in Britain has done on the dependence of the Five Eyes nations, which of course are Britain, America, New Zealand, Canada and Australia, and their dependency upon Chinese manufacturers and materials and what have you for their supply chains is really deeply concerning. It's going to be very, very difficult to unwind that dependency without shooting ourselves in the foot, it seems to me. Even in the case of Australia, where Australian farmers, you're a farmer, I'm a farmer, Australia exports a higher percentage of its food production than any other country in the world because we have such a small domestic population. We would appear to be as self-sufficient as any nation in the world in terms of food production, and yet we're not. We're dependent on certain key chemicals and so forth now from China.
Same even to a greater degree, there's the same apprehension. We keep talking about returning industries to the United States, especially protective equipment, medical supplies, pharmaceuticals, strategic materials, military applied technologies. But what we're learning is that our education system has been in decline, and the so-called STEM graduates, or the people necessary to ensure us not the original research, but the next level of operational research. We don't have enough graduates, and we're not competitive yet unless we, re-engineer our universities. And it's going to be, and a lot of our corporate magnates feel that they want to move back, but they're going to lose capital, they're going to lose bank accounts, and it's making it very hard to do so. And one of the problems we're having in the Western world is with the rise of progressive government and its emphasis on race, class, gender issues. The Chinese are much more brilliant in terms of propaganda than we are. So by any measure of classical liberality, the Chinese are very reactionary. They have 1 million, as you know, people, the Uyghurs in concentration camps, if I could use that term, re-education camp. They've silenced democracy, extinguished it in Hong Kong. They've destroyed indigenous culture in Tibet. In terms of mercantilism, they're an international trade outlaw. They bullied their neighbors. And I think we're going to learn that either out of laxity or worse, they're responsible for 500,000 deaths from COVID. And yet, when this crisis arose, when we had a travel ban, they were very effective in suggesting that we were racist. This is a very undiverse society saying that we are racist. And every time that we try to make a concerted effort to push back, they use that left wing, you're racist, you're insensitive, it's the yellow peril again. And they've really infiltrated the United States entertainment industry, Hollywood, and even the NBA. The NBA is very vocal in their criticism of supposed social activism and things in the United States. And yet, when China crushed Hong Kong, they pretty much silenced all of their players in fears they would endanger that $6 billion and growing NBA market in China. So they're a very insidious rival, and I don't think yet we have any imagination of their potential and their capability in terms of propaganda and messaging.
That's a very chilling perspective. To come to the question of education, 2 comments. Firstly, in relation to the STEM subjects, as an Australian looking at America, we still see this remarkable capacity for innovation. You still dominate the patent markets, applications and what have you. The impression you have is that in those STEM subjects, America is still very strong. You're saying that, though, that there's been a shortage of graduates in that area, that you haven't got the people you need to keep the technology edge.
I think what I was trying to say is that when we look at the quality of engineers that are being trained at Caltech, Stanford, MIT, they're the best in the world. But the next tier of people who translate abstraction into operational efficacy, we have about 70% are foreign students that are necessary, or because we've had a radical readjustment the last 50 years in higher education, and a lot of our most talented people, unfortunately, have been going into Wall Street, finance, and law, and to a lesser degree in the humanities. And we haven't, for the ambitious programs we have and for the sophisticated innovation that we develop, we're not utilizing it in a way that's self-interested because we're so dependent. And so when we say we want to become autonomous from China, a lot of our more informed scholars, I know that if I write something like that in an op-ed, I get a call from a very distinguished person off the record that says, Victor, we don't have, or we only have 20%, 30% of the PhDs in electrical engineering or, nanotechnology that we need. And we're very dependent on foreign students. And we've got to be very careful that this divorce is done in such a way that we're not punished in the short term. So it's something that I think we're all aware of. And it's kind of frightening how China is not competitive with the Western world in pure research, but it is more than competitive in translating that pure research into viable products and innovative designs of consumer product. And part of it is, it's not just that they're renegades and they don't follow patent and copyright law, but they have the fusion of the government, the private sector to the degree that we can call it a private sector, and then the whole machinery of government. And they understand American politics, I think, much better than Americans do sometimes. And that's very frightening.
So, and the other side, the second question on education, it seems to me, is the non-STEM areas, the humanities, if you like. It seems to me that right across the West, for 50, 60 years at least now, there's been this relentless attack on the institutions of our own freedom, this undermining and reinterpretation of our history that has left people actually in a state of self-loathing of Western culture. And part of that has been an incredible naivety, I would put it to you, about what communism has actually visited on the world whenever it's been trialed.
Yeah, that's a very good point. In the ancient world, people from Thucydides to Plato to Aristotle, and in the Roman world, some of the nihilists like Suetonius or Petronius, and then our critics in the German world, Nietzsche and Hegel and whatnot, they spotted these two characteristics of Western consensual government and market capitalism, that it creates so much wealth and it's so efficient in providing material bounty for its citizens, and yet it also protects individual expression, that if we're not careful and we don't have the brakes, so to speak, or the bridles of family, religion, tradition, community, then we can be, we can become decadent and we give into excess. And part of the problem in the crisis of the post-war Western world is, in the English-speaking world in particular, but also in Europe, we were very affluent, we were very leisured, and we pushed the boundaries of freedom without any historical reminders that we were destroying the community, the religion, the traditions that said, yes, that's free, and you're legally free to do that, but I wouldn't say that, or I wouldn't do that because it's injurious to the body politic. And so that was something that it's plagued Western civilization for a long time, since its beginning, that irony. And then we, in the West, with the decolonization movement, and the United States' radical change in immigration, we brought in people throughout Europe and the former British Commonwealth and in your country and in our country, that we felt we were going, because we're the only civilization, the Western paradigm is the only civilization that says we're about ideas. We're not about blood and soil. Anybody can come to Australia, and if they embrace Australianism and Western tradition, there's Australian, even if they're from China or from Africa, as an Australian. We have the same concept. Unfortunately, that is a very fragile concept, and it depends on the host having confidence in its own values and saying, you came here, you voted with your feet, it's our duty to instruct you, to assimilate you, to integrate you, and to embrace our culture. It doesn't mean that we say in the West, oh, we don't want your food, we don't want your music, we don't want your fashion, we don't want your family. We say that can all enrich our core values, but we're not going to change constitutional government, free speech, and the whole paradigm. And unfortunately, with people coming so rapidly and in such numbers to enjoy the bounty of the Western paradigm, and then we had this cynical elite that we just talked about, we didn't prepare people to acculturate, and then it was worse than that. We said that equality, not freedom, is our only value, and it's equality of results. So if you're not equal when you get to Australia, let's say from the Philippines or China or South America, or you're not equal when you come up from Oaxaca, Mexico to California, then we're culpable because we did something wrong because you have less money. And the old paradigm was this was a very ambitious project. It might take 2 or 3 generations, and we weren't going to condemn the host because they didn't provide instant parity. But we're in revolutionary times now because we're not assimilating and integrating our immigrants, and our elite is completely intellectually and morally suspect.
Yeah, I sympathize entirely with your views. I find them very, very concerning. Can I pose to you that just perhaps China's handling of COVID-19 and the extraordinary, I know I agree with you when you say that they probably understand our democratic systems better than us. Goodness only knows how and where they've been peddling influence. And we've been very conscious of that now in Australia. Nonetheless, I would say the way they've handled COVID-19 and the bellicose reaction that we've had from them on issues such as a proper inquiry into COVID-19, do you think that may yet serve as a massive wake-up call? And if so, is it in time? Can we turn this around?
That's a very good question, and it's something that I read deeply about and try to think and talk to people where I work. And I would say it's ambiguous. I think you're absolutely right that Trump is no longer in the United States a voice in the wilderness, about warning about China. Everybody is now trying to outdo each other in concern and worry about China. And we've kind of broken through the Chinese taboo. We now can say what you're doing with the Uyghurs is wrong, and what you're doing to Hong Kong is wrong. Whereas before, corporate and university interest in a very strange symbiosis, silence. I know as an op-ed columnist, when I wrote critically of China, I would get a call from the consul in San Francisco with a problem. And that's good, and I agree with you. But I think we're in a second very critical phase now, because I think if I should be so bold to imagine the Chinese response, it was something like this: oh my gosh, this virus has ruined our brand. It's united our enemies. It's woken up the Western world to what we were planning to do. And now we've got indigenous people within our system that are angry. We've got Japan, South Korea, Australia, Philippines, our neighbors. We've got and that's good. But I think now they're becoming a little bit more Machiavellian. And from what I'm reading about China, it's more, if I could put words into their mouth, is, yeah, we screwed up and the virus went out, and maybe our narrative that came from wet market wasn't quite right, and it came actually from the Wuhan lab, and maybe or maybe not, it was an engineered, not for a weapon maybe, but maybe for a vaccination, but we don't really care. So what? We screwed up, and now what are you going to do about it? In fact, what are you going to do about it? Because wink and nod, it can happen again. And if a virus can shut down the entire Western world, and with a quarantine that's never happened under any other plague, ruin the economy, cause the biggest power in the history of civilization to fall on its knees in internal divisiveness, the United States, that's something that we should consider, because it achieved far more goals, even though it was nihilistic or accidental, than anything we had done in the past with our propaganda. And now we've got a deterrent proposition that anytime the United States or the West tends to galvanize against this, we can have some dissident general on spec say, you know what, there might be a virus loose in a province of China. So I think it's pretty scary, because I think now, after their own initial apologies, if I could say, it wasn't much of an apology, but their defensiveness has now been transmogrified into a new assertiveness. And they're starting to realize that they're not going to be apologetic at all. And they're going to be more on demand, because they feel they've found a weakness in the entire social, cultural, and political matrix of the West that they had no idea about. And this virus has really exposed it, I think.
Thank you for watching this episode. We appreciate your support. If you value vital conversations like this one, be sure to subscribe to the channel there, and also click the notification bell to stay up to date with new releases.